Short run total cost. Short run cost has been divided into variable cost and fixed cost. Variable cost we have already studied. Variable costs are those costs which vary with the production level, which vary with the output. So variable cost can be said to be dependent upon the output. For example, direct labor, raw material cost. These are the costs which depend upon the amount of output that the entrepreneur wants to produce. If he wants to produce more, he'll have to incur more wages, he'll have to incur more cost on materials. However, if he wants to reduce the output, the cost on materials and the cost of wages will come down automatically. The important thing to note here is variable cost is fixed per unit. Now this is very difficult to understand. I'm saying variable cost is the cost which varies with the production level. And in the next sentence I'm saying variable cost is fixed per unit. I will come back to this point when we are done with the fixed cost. Now, fixed cost is that cost which cannot be changed with output. It remains fixed. It remains constant. It cannot be avoided. So, fixed cost is independent of output. It does not depend on output. It remains fixed irrespective of the level of output. For example, rent or salary to the manager. Now, if you produce or no, you'll have to pay the salary to the manager. You'll have to pay the salary to the manager. If you produce 100 units, if you produce 1000 units, or you produce 10,000 units, the salary to the manager will remain the same. Same is the case with rent. If you've taken a factory shed on rent, now if you produce 10 units or you produce 10,000 units, it doesn't matter. You will have to pay rent. Even if you do not produce anything, you'll still have to pay rent. So the rent is a fixed cost. It remains fixed. You cannot change it with the level of output. Again, here we see that the fixed cost is variable per unit. Now this again is a very puzzling statement. I say fixed cost remains fixed. It does not vary with the amount of output. And in the next sentence, I'm saying fixed cost is variable per unit. Now let's understand these two sentences with the help of an example. We have taken different levels of output. Now, the cost required to produce one product is 100 rupees. This includes the wages cost, this includes the material cost, this includes all the costs which are incurred to bring the material to the factory shed. So, for the example, variable cost per unit is 100. So, in our example, if we do not produce anything, we will not incur any variable cost. If we produce 1 unit, variable cost will be 100. If we produce 2 units, variable cost will be 2000. If we produce 300 units, 3 into 100 variable cost will be 300. For 4 units it will be 400, for 5 units it will be 500, and finally for 6 units it will be 600. Now, fixed cost is something which remains fixed. Let's assume rent. The rent of the factory which we have taken or which we have hired is for a rent of rupees 1000 for a month. So even if I don't produce anything, I will have to shell out 1000. If I produce one unit, I'll still have to shell out only 1000. If I produce two units, the fixed cost is 1000. 3 units 1000, 4 units 1000, 5 units 1000, and finally 6 units 1000. So whatever be the number of units that I produce, the rent will not change. The rent will be same at each level. Now from this you can see that as I am going on increasing the production, as I'm going on increasing the output level, the variable cost is also increasing with it, because I'll require more material, I'll require more workers in my factory, so I'll have to pay more wages, more material and more wages, that means more cost. So for producing one unit, I need 100 rupees. For producing two units, cost is 200. For producing 3 units, cost is 300. For producing 4 units, cost is 400. Producing 5 units, cost is 500. For producing 6 units, the cost is 600. However, when I come to the fixed cost, you can see that it is fixed at all levels. Whatever be the number of units that I produce, I pay the same amount of rent. So this suffices our statement that the variable cost is dependent upon output. It is directly related to output, whereas the fixed cost is independent of output. It is not related to output. Now let's try to prove these two sentences. Variable cost is fixed per unit. Fixed cost is variable per unit. Per unit cost, that means the average cost. So if I calculate the average variable cost here, it will be, the cost is 0 for 0 units, so it will be 0. For 1 unit, I am required to pay 100 rupees. My cost is 100 rupees. So average variable cost is 100. What will be the cost per unit if I produce 2 units? If I am producing 2 units, my variable cost is 200. So this cost 200 is for 2 units. What is the per unit cost? It is 200 divided by 2. So it is, the average variable cost is 100. For 3 units, my variable cost is 300. So per unit variable cost, or the average variable cost, is 100, and this holds goods for all levels. So now you can see that the variable cost per unit is always fixed. Likewise, we'll calculate the average fixed cost. The fixed cost for producing no units is 1000. You'll have to incur it. So 1000 divided by 0, in maths it is meaningless. Let's say infinity. For the next level, 1000 is the cost for producing 1 unit. So average fixed cost here is 1000. At the second level, if I produce 2 units, I'll still have to pay 1000 only. So the cost per unit now will be 1000 divided by 2. 500 will be the average fixed cost per unit at the second level. If I produce 3 units, I'll still pay only 1000. So now this 1000 will get divided into 3 units. The cost will get divided, and the average fixed cost will be 333. For 4 units, I'll still pay 1000. The fixed cost per unit will now be 250. For 5 units, I'll still pay 1000. The cost will come down to 200. For 6 units also I'll pay 1000. So now the cost is furthermore coming down. It is 166.67 now. So now from these two columns, you can see that the variable cost per unit is constant, it is fixed. However, the fixed cost per unit or the average fixed cost is not constant, it is variable. It shrinks, it diminishes, it decreases with the amount of output. As the output goes on increasing, the fixed cost tends to come down because the total cost is fixed. So if I go on increasing the number of units, that much cost will get divided into that many number of units. So per unit cost will go on reducing. Now let's just go through the fixed cost once again. Fixed cost is that cost which remains fixed. In this example, we have the following fixed costs. Rent, which is rupees 50,000 per month. Depreciation, which is rupees 80,000 per month. Manager's salary 60,000 per month. Interest on loan 10,000 per month. And the total is 2 lakhs. So 2 lakhs rupees is the fixed cost that I'll be bearing per month. I cannot change this cost. Whatever be the level of output, it will remain the same. So even if I produce 1000 units, I'll have to pay 2 lakhs. If I produce 20,000 units, I'll still have to pay 2 lakhs. If I increase my production to 20,000, I'll still incur 2 lakhs. Even if I increase my production to 1 lakh units, the fixed cost will remain fixed at 2 lakhs. So we've already done how to calculate fixed cost per unit. 2 lakhs divided by 10,000 is 20. 2 lakhs divided by 20,000 is 10. 2 lakhs divided by 30,000 is approximately 7. 2 lakhs divided by 40,000 is 5. 2 lakhs divided by 50,000 is 4. And 2 lakhs divided by 1 lakh is 2. So coming to this graph, we have taken the fixed cost on y-axis and output on the x-axis. If we tend to plot the points will be something like this. And if we join them, this is the straight line that we'll get. So the curve for fixed cost is always parallel to the x-axis. It is always parallel to the x-axis. Because the fixed cost does not change, it remains same, it remains constant for any level of activity, for any level of production. At the same time, if we try to plot the average fixed cost curve on this graph, the curve would be something like this. It keeps on falling. It is falling from 20, it came to 10, from 10 it fell to 7, from 7 to 5, 5 to 4, and finally to 2. So, although the fixed cost curve remains constant, the average fixed cost or the fixed cost per unit curve tends to fall as the activity increases, as the output increases, as the production increases. Now, let's understand what is variable cost. We've already done variable cost. In this example, the variable cost is bottle rupees 3, crown zero point 0.5, washing charges 0.5. So the total variable cost is rupees 4 per unit. So if we produce 10,000 units, we'll have to incur 40,000 rupees. If we produce 20,000 units, we'll have to incur 80,000 rupees. If we incur 30,000 units, we'll have to incur 1,20,000 rupees. If we produce 40,000 units, the variable cost will be 1,60,000. Likewise, if we produce 50,000 units, the variable cost will be 2 lakhs. And finally, if we produce 1 lakh units, the variable cost will be 4 lakh rupees. Now, what is happening is the variable cost here is going on increasing. As the production is increasing, the total variable cost is also increasing. However, the average variable cost or the variable cost per unit is constant at all levels. At all levels of activity, it remains constant. If we plot the total variable cost curve on a graph, it will be something like this. Sloping upwards. The total fixed cost curve was always parallel to x-axis. However, the total variable cost curve always slopes upwards. Because as the production level increases, the cost also goes on increasing. The cost also goes on increasing. So it shapes like the supply curve. Since the quantity supplied is directly related to the price, the supply curve slopes upwards. In the same way, the total variable cost is also directly related to the output, and thus the total variable cost curve slopes upward. So this is how the total variable cost curve looks. Now let's understand what are semi-variable costs. Semi-variable costs are those costs which are a combination of fixed cost and variable cost. It is a mix of both. Some part of it is fixed and the remaining part is variable, and thus we call it the semi-variable cost. The best example here is the electricity charges. The electricity bill that you get has per unit charges, but those units are divided into slabs. So if we consume more units of electricity, we'll be placed into higher slabs, and with each slab your cost goes on increasing. So what happens is, the more consumption you do of the electricity, more would be your bill, because the variable portion in it goes on increasing. The fixed portion remains the same, it remains the constant. However, the variable portion goes on increasing. Let's see how the semi-variable cost appears on a graph. The semi-variable cost is always upward sloping. Now, why is it upward sloping? Because it is a mix of fixed cost and variable cost. So, fixed cost remains fixed, and later on, variable cost goes on adding to it. If you do not consume any electricity in your house, you will still have to pay the rental charges. Even at the zero level of consumption, you'll have to bear the fixed cost. But as you go on increasing the consumption, the variable component goes on increasing, and then this curve tends to rise. Since the variable portion keeps on adding in, the curve tends to rise upwards. So the more consumption, more would be the steeper slope of this semi-variable cost. And in this example, we can see that there are two components in the semi-variable cost. This is the fixed component and this is the variable component. Initially, the fixed component is greater than the variable component. Later on, the weight of the variable component goes on increasing. Now let's understand what are stair-step variable cost or step-up variable cost. This cost increases in a stair-step like fashion. It remains fixed for some time and then suddenly jumps up, and then again remains fixed for some time, again jumps up, again remains fixed for some time and then again jumps up, and this pattern keeps on continuing. One of the best examples that you can give for this cost is the machinery. Let's say a machinery Let's say you buy a machinery on which 5 people can work at the same time. Now what happens is, if you employ one laborer, the cost remains the same. If you employ two laborers, the cost again remains fixed, it remains same. If you employ three laborers, the cost again remains the same. Same is the case with four laborers and five laborers. Now suddenly, when you employ the sixth laborer, you will have to buy a new machinery. And what will happen is your cost will take a rise, it will take a jump. It will suddenly rise from there and will again remain fixed for the next 5 employees. It will again jump if you employ more than 10 employees and will remain fixed till the 15 employees, because you will have to go on purchasing more and more machinery. So after every fifth employee, you'll have to purchase one machinery. So what will happen is your cost will remain fixed for the first 5 employees, then it will suddenly go up when you employ the sixth one. It will again remain fixed till you have employed 10 employees, and then it will again jump if you employ the 11th. It will again remain fixed till you employ 15, so on and so forth.